Welcome everyone to the afternoon live stream. I'm hosting today, specifically focused on associative remote viewing, and we'll be talking a little bit about how to apply it, how it's applied in the financial market, and a couple other things. But thanks for joining. So if you guys are kind of new to remote viewing or definitely interested in kind of trying it out for the first time, I do have a hands-on portion, which we'll be getting to in a little bit. But the way I kind of structured this live stream is I'm going to start with a short presentation to kind of go over some of the basics. My intention with this live stream is for it to be very, very beginner friendly. And the reason for that is a lot of people reached out who did sign up to this, who said that they were brand new to the whole thing. And so, which is interesting because there's actually a lot more interest in remote viewing these days, which is really cool to hear. So it's definitely a lot of new faces, new people around here. But kind of before getting into the presentation, want to introduce myself. I'm Brett Stewart, the founder of Technical Intuition, and I'm also the author of the book Remote Viewing, The Complete Guide. And a little bit about me, just a short bio, is I've been exploring intuition and remote viewing for about 10 years now, maybe a little bit longer. And I've worked with hundreds of students, online courses, in-person seminars. Fortunately, not doing many of those right now, but that's why we have Zoom. And so I have things like this. And I also do a lot of one-on-one coaching as well. So for those that do know me, you probably known that I kind of took a step back for about 1 to 2 years from the public remote viewing sphere. And I'm excited to say, though, that hiatus is now over, and I have some pretty exciting things planned. One of them being the formation of a new Facebook community group, which I'm starting today, which everyone here is invited to join. I'll be talking more about that at the end of this live stream. We'll be doing a lot more regular live streams. And so these will be presentations. These will be hands-on exercises where if you want to follow along, do a group exercise, get feedback, it'll be things like that. And these are things really, my intention is to get a lot more involved, create a community that's focused around applying remote viewing in real world projects, specifically in financial markets. Because to be honest, that's something that really excites me about it. Today, what we're going to do is it's going to be basically 3 main parts and a Q&A. First part, I'm going to talk about RV, what it is in general. Second part, and this is I have a couple slides I want to show you guys about what this is. Second part is I'll be doing an overview of associative remote viewing, what makes it different, kind of how the tasking works. And then finally, we'll switch gears over into a hands-on learning portion of this live stream where I'll be showing you I'll just show you instead of describing it. I have very handy dandy, I use this for my coaching, my one-on-one coaching, where I can talk to you guys and I can actually, this is like my own little, oops, not on. It's my own little whiteboard for you guys to kind of show you guys examples of what actual structured remote viewing looks like. And so I'm going to show you a very, very simple version of structured remote viewing today that if you don't know how to remote view right now, I'm going to show you probably it's a five-minute introduction so you can do a session and just get a sense for what it's like. And then you'll be applying it towards an actual real world target. And that's market related. So, but if you already know how to remote view and you're here just to kind of have some fun, ask some questions, use your own methodology for remote viewing, then you absolutely can do that too. And we'll talk about results afterwards. So why don't we jump in? I'm gonna switch my screen here. Switch over to the first slide. And since this is a very beginner friendly live stream, and obviously I'll be opening questions up to those maybe who have a lot more experience. We can talk about that later in the Q&A if you have things like that. But I do want to just give a really basic outline of what remote viewing is. I mean, there's a lot of people who call remote viewing a lot of different things. And so what is it though? How do we describe it? Because some people say, well, just spontaneous clairvoyance is remote viewing, or my dreams, I had this dream about something happening in the future, that's remote viewing. And really, it's not. There's a very specific thing which remote viewing entails, which I'll be just describing here. But the definition, why don't we start there? It's always a good place to start. The definition, which this actually comes from the official DIA CRV manual, is that remote viewing is the name for a method of psychoenergetic perception. And this was coined by the Stanford Research Institute. And they defined specifically remote viewing as the description and acquisition by mental means of information blocked from ordinary perception by distance, shielding, or time. So theirs is pretty specific, But if you actually get down into the manual and you look at what are the steps, what does it entail, remote viewing is actually very much a skill. It's something that is learned. It's something that has a specific protocol, specific methods that are applied to it. And I'm going to show you a little bit of what that looks like here on the next few slides. So what is it? Let's take a look. Well, the very first step, let's just start with step one. What does the process of remote viewing look like? And I'm going to take you through the 4 primary steps of what this looks like. The first begins, you need a topic. Someone has to choose a topic at some point. This can be a project manager, but ultimately you need a formalized task. And so this is something that can be written on a piece of paper. This is something you can print it out, put it in an envelope. There's a lot of different ways to set up tasks, but someone has to at some point have decided this is worth looking at. And so this is why whenever someone describes a spontaneous intuitive event, they're not remote viewing because nothing was pre-set up to begin with. So how is this done? Well, typically the way this is done in here in the little graphic on the slide, this is just a really simple example, is when you're practicing and you're learning remote viewing, you use photographs. And this is an example, usually you can print them out, put them in an envelope and write a number on that envelope. And then you hand that number off to viewers. And so they have no idea what the actual task is. All they're given is a number that's associated with the photograph, with this practice target. Now, this is just for practice. So obviously, once you move into things like market forecasting, business intelligence, whatever it is you want to, if you decide to take remote viewing and actually become really proficient at it and use it in the real world, we move a bit beyond photographs at this point. But at the very basic level, the first step is you always need a formalized task. The second step in the process is you need the viewer, and not any kind of viewer. You need a viewer that doesn't know what the task is. It's referred to as operating blind, which simply means that if you were the viewer and I gave you a set of reference numbers, you would have no idea, you'd have no foreknowledge about what task I set up. Now, blindness, this topic of blindness, it probably deserves a full presentation in and of itself because there's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of even controversy around it because there's this thing which is referred to as working front-loaded. And there's degrees of this that different communities have very vocal proponents of one versus the other on. So I may actually be talking about blindness in a future live stream. I almost certainly will. But just for the basics, the second step really in the remote viewing process is that whoever's doing the work doesn't know what the task is. And really, if you think about it, it helps that viewer only put their attention on spontaneous perceptions that are coming in. They're not having to worry about biases, imagination to the same degree as if they already knew, hey, your target is a type of person who's working, for Dell or something like that, whatever it is. It's like if you have to deal with that kind of analysis before you even jump into a session, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to access spontaneous data because you're just going to go into imagination land, which is not what you want to do. It's exactly the opposite of what you want to happen in a remote viewing session. So that's really the second part of the process. The third part of the process, moving on to step 3, is the actual method that's used. The method is what the actual viewer, what do they do? They're given these numbers. A task manager has set something up, say a photograph in an envelope. And well, what do they do with these numbers? Well, there are a lot of different methods that can be employed. There's not just one type of remote viewing method. There's the very simple method that I'm going to be showing you guys later on in this live stream, which if you have zero experience with remote viewing, you can literally jump in after a few minutes of instruction and give a shot at it. It's really that simple. There are also methods that are a lot more involved, that have a lot more complexity. There's a lot more reasoning and also even research around using different types of techniques and kind of how to get more data, higher level data. All sorts of different tools have been developed for different methods. But ultimately, typically most methods work. It's really the viewer who's doing the heavy lifting. And if they stick with the method and practice it, it's not the method that's doing it for them. The method's just the structure for them to acquire the data, to focus, pen on paper, or even if the method is a free-form method, it's still a version of accessing the data that you are perceiving in your mind spontaneously. This is a structured way of using those numbers to access data that comes to you, information. So you need a method. The very final step, say you use a method, and now you have a session. You sat down, you've had a piece of paper or a couple pieces of paper. You've gone through the structure of the method, which is, okay, do 1, 2, and 3, and then you're done. Well, there's one final part. And the final part has to do with analysis and feedback. Analysis is when you're looking at your session, you're trying to understand what you have. And so this is typically before you're given any feedback. Okay, well, how well did you do? And the reason why there's feedback, and even actually just to go back to step 2 for blindness, the reason why these exist and why this structure is so embedded within remote viewing is because remote viewing actually originally was defined as purely the label for a scientific experiment. It was a scientific experiment to test if psychical functioning was occurring. That's really what remote viewing was originally defined as. If you go back and you read, if anyone here is familiar with Ingo Swann, who's considered the father of remote viewing, he wrote about this and he actually was a little upset that the term was kind of more loosely being used as opposed to anything that's happening outside of a laboratory experiment, because he had worked a lot of time to get it set up, to get accepted back in the 70s and around that era that he was being taken seriously. And he really didn't like that. So even though, Ingo Swann didn't like that, it happened anyway. I mean, over the past 30, 40, 50 years since that point, remote viewing has definitely expanded in what it entails, but it's still typically the most agreed upon structure for the steps are these main steps. There's obviously more complexity to these when you're talking about, if there are people who are very familiar with remote viewing, there's the protocols of remote viewing, which are alluded to in here, as well as different methods. But ultimately, this is when someone's talking about remote viewing, this is what they're referring to for the most part. So now that we've done a brief overview of what in the world is remote viewing, well, let's take a look at the difference between that type of a process versus associative remote viewing, because it is actually a little bit different, but I want to show you how. The steps for an associative remote viewing project really differ mostly at the beginning and the end, in step 1 and step 4. The middle is pretty much the same. And so when someone's referring to associative remote viewing, they're referring typically to a type of task. And so it's spending more time early on and asking a question in a very unique way to get a specific answer. So what do I mean by that? Well, here on the slide, you can see that there are 2 different little icon images, A and B. A is associated with a landscape. B is associated with a little cute face of a dog, right? And so those would be referred to as associations. And so I say, okay, I've decided that this photo means, let's just use one since I'm very much into financial markets and it's what it's used for a lot. Let's just take a real world example. Let's say that I want to know whether or not a stock is going to go up or down. And a way you can use remote viewing to determine this or to make a forecast on whether it goes up or goes down is you associate one of the outcomes with one of the photos. Let's just say the stock's going to go up, associate that with the landscape. And you associate the stock will go down in the future, you associate that outcome with the picture of the dog. And the final part of the setup, the predefined task, is, if you can see there on the slide, is what's referred to as a cue, C-U-E. And a cue is really just a fancy way of saying a set of instructions. It's laying out, it's typically in written form. The project manager writes something down and says, okay, if you're viewing this, make sure that you view the correctly associated photograph about what will happen in the future. And so it's the project manager writing down their intent about what they want the remote viewer to look at in their session. And so, there's a lot of other ways to do this too. Actually, it's not just like, hey, remote view queuing is a very complex topic, way more complex than I can kind of talk about here. But there's other ways to do it too, where you could say, okay, I'm going to attach 2 different photos to outcomes, stock going up with the landscape, stock going down with the dog. And instead of setting up a queue with which is the correctly associated photo about what will happen in the future, you'd ask something like, remote view the photo that I show you next, or remote view the feedback that I give you tomorrow, something like that. It's really just a set of instructions, typically written, that's associated with the number that's given. And so again, We have a predefined target. That's step 1 of the ARV. Step 2 of associative remote viewing is exactly the same as the previous. It requires a blind viewer. So a number, the viewer has no idea what photos have been chosen. Typically, they don't know also what they're even looking at to begin with, like if they're doing a stock or they're doing something else. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. But really the most significant thing is they don't know what photos are associated with it. So they're blind, and then they run their session. And then if they're asked in the queue, which again, they don't know, to remote view the current correct one, then their data should match one of these photos. And that's step 3, which is the method. So they'll apply their method, whatever that method is. All they have are the numbers. And in their session, their data, their perceptual data that they write down should match one of the photos. And so here's why we have like a download picture of the dog. Maybe that was the correct answer for that particular question that was being set up. So what does that mean? Well, what does a session look like? A session would be something, if it was the dog, you'd expect their spontaneous perceptions to describe it, not necessarily name it, but their structured method would describe it. So they probably have something like it's fuzzy, it's furry, it's soft, it's making kind of a repeating sound, it's moving around a lot, it's wiggling something. It's a description of it. Remote viewing is ultimately a description of things, oftentimes without naming them. And so if that's what the actual session data said, then moving on to the final step, which is step 4. Step 4 is analysis and feedback, just like before, but it's a different kind of analysis and feedback because you have 2 different photos. And so you typically either the viewer or an independent judge, there's 2 different ways to do it, will look at the remote viewing session, the data that was perceived, and then compare and contrast that data to the 2 different photos. And they decide which one it matches best. And whatever data, the session data, matches best, that will be that viewer's particular result. Now, that doesn't mean that their result is going to be the correct answer. That's a whole different ball of wax to kind of unravel about, well, why would someone get an incorrect answer? Or why would someone get both answers? And these are solvable things. And I know they're solvable things because I've spent the last 2 years tackling them really in behind the scenes. So but this is what the step 4 looks like. It's analysis and feedback. And you go through all of your data that you get in the session, either you or a judge, and you try and pattern match. You say, okay, which photo does this match the best? And then whatever photo it matches the best, whatever the original outcome was back in step 1, that's what your result will be. And so you can see the difference between ARV and a regular remote viewing session. There are certainly similarities, but the big difference in how you set it up and how you actually do the analysis and feedback. There's differences kind of on the bookends, if you will, of the steps. But there's a lot of different ways you can use ARV. You don't have to only use it in the market, whether stock goes up, stock goes down. You can also use it to ask yes or no questions. You can use it to ask true or false questions. You can use it to ask, will team A win a game or will team B win a game? There's a whole lot of different ways you can use this. But ultimately, the type of question that you're asking in associative remote viewing is always going to be an if this or is it that. It's referred to as a binary problem, a 0 or a 1. It's either going to be true or it's going to be false. It's going to be up or it's going to be down. It's going to be yes or it's going to be no. Those are the type of questions that ARV is most prominently used for, is to solve yes or no type questions, binary. Whereas regular remote viewing, it's just pure description. It could be anything. It could be describe a photograph. It could be describe the location of my missing car keys. It could be describe what's broken on the International Space Station. It could be anything. But ARV kind of takes the ability that people innately have to be able to describe something at a distance. And what it does is it kind of puts it into a structure that allows you to come out with a very specific outcome. Yes, no, true, false, up, down, things like that. And so that's what I have for kind of my presentation on the differences between remote viewing and associative remote viewing. Why don't I here just real briefly take a look at the chat and any Q&A and just throw it out here. Does anyone have any questions right now about the differences or about remote viewing that I'm happy I'm here to answer them. Or if not, we can always just jump into the next segment, which is the the hands-on learning part, where I kind of show you a very basic version on how to do it. Aaron asks, does performing ARV make us lose RV ability? This is actually, it's funny, this is the same question came up in the earlier live stream. And it is a bit of a nuanced answer, because now I think the way most people, and the way you're probably asking that question, Aaron, is if I do ARV, will I not be able to remote view at all? Personally, I mean, and from my experience of doing remote viewing for over 10 years, pretty much the answer is no, because ARV is remote viewing. It's not that you're not doing a remote viewing session. You're still sitting down with a method, you're taking a reference number typically, and you're sitting down running a session, going through the stages that you've learned, whatever method you've learned, and then you're ending the session. You're still doing a remote viewing session. So it's almost a little bit of a non sequitur to ask, if I do ARV, will I lose my RV ability? Because ARV is RV. But if you get into some of the nuance of it, which is probably where, if you've heard this from other people, where, I mean, there's even actually under one of my posts in Facebook, it's pretty interesting. Someone kind of wrote a bit of a diatribe that anyone says ARV destroys your intuitive ability. And I couldn't possibly disagree more with that. And not only, I mean, the other kind of thing that I've read out there is that people are kind of espousing this idea that everyone who's an instructor, or everyone who has kind of used remote viewing in the past has kind of never used ARV because it ruins ability. And that also is not true whatsoever. Even the original scientists that helped develop remote viewing, controlled remote viewing with Ingo Swann, such as Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, they used ARV in the market, and they actually made a lot of money in the market using ARV. They didn't use photos like what most of ARVers use today. They used simple objects. So they took like a cup and, let's say, my cell phone. I mean, obviously they didn't have that back then, but two separate objects. And they basically said, hey, okay, I'm going to assign meaning to these objects. I want you to remote view the object I'm going to show you tomorrow. And so, and they may say, well, I'm going to assign that the market goes up with my iced tea here, and the market's going to go down. I'm going to assign with my cell phone. And so whatever the group of people remote viewed, that would then, they'd know, okay, the market's going to go up tomorrow. So let's take a look at how we can get into a strategy that profits off that predictive information. So even the original scientists use ARV, but there's even others beyond that. So that's kind of the answer to that question. But one final point, that's because this is actually, I've seen this kind of really prevalent in a lot of different Facebook groups. So I'm not sure where it came from. Maybe you can inform me about where you heard this. But the reason why perhaps ARV would cause you to lose remote viewing ability, even though it's still remote viewing, is it's the type of method that you're using to remote view, and also the type of targets that you're viewing. And this is really, I think, true for any type of remote viewing target type, is that if you're only doing, let's say you learned a remote view, and you learned a remote view with an extensive methodology, you're in session for, say, 45 minutes, you're getting data for 45 minutes, and you really practice that, built that up to be able to get a lot of data, really comprehensive, a lot of sketches, a lot of high-level data in that time, and that's what you learned in practice. And then you say, ooh, this ARV thing is interesting. It's a unique structure to be able to solve questions with. And then you begin practicing in ARV, where you're only spending about 5 minutes in a session. And you do that, and that's all you do. Well, let's say you do that for a year or 2 years or a long period of time. Maybe it's only 6 months, and you don't perform a single other full, let's just call them a full remote viewing session or remote viewing project. That's maybe a couple hours worth of remote viewing time on the same target. You only do these little tiny snapshot sessions, and that's all you're doing. I absolutely think that only doing that would be a disservice to your ability to do a full session, because you're not practicing it. You're not practicing doing full sessions. So the ARV session itself isn't what took away from the ability to do a longer session, or to figure out where your missing keys are, or whatever it is. But it's, if you don't practice the type of targets that you're interested in getting data around, you more than likely will lose the ability of doing that. Probably because you're just not used to sitting in session for as long. You're only looking for data that is relevant to the ARV session. Short answer is no, I do not believe ARV makes us lose the ability to RV, because ARV is remote viewing. It's just a different target type. However, long answer is more complicated than that. if you only practice one type of target, then other types of target will almost inevitably begin to degrade a little bit, your ability to do that. And so there's a very simple solution to this. Have all target types in your pool of practice. Do a photo here and there. Do an operational target here and there. Do an ARV. So it's like having a healthy diet of food. Do approach targets that you actually tackle in remote viewing the same way. And if you do that, then any of this kind of, I've been doing both. I do a lot of contract work with full remote viewing sessions, business intelligence, market forecast, things like that are full remote viewing sessions. And I do ARV. And in doing both, I've never seen a degradation of one or the other. Now, if I stop doing one of the or the other, that over time will result in degradation. But it's not because I did the ARV. It's just because I stopped practicing the other target type. Pina asks, great presentation so far. Thanks, Pina. And also, nice to see you. What is the accuracy of answering binary questions with ARV? That is really, really dependent on the viewer. Now, I've seen and it's really dependent. There's so many variables in there, but you can absolutely get that accuracy up to 70, 80%. And there are periods of time where I've seen 90% accuracy with ARV data. Typically, most people I've seen not able to hold that, but there are a lot of reasons of why accuracy can go down. And a lot of it, especially when you're looking at financial markets and there's a prospect where money's on the line, it has to do with mindset. It has to do with belief systems. It has to do with, hey, if you can suddenly start using an intuitive ability to forecast the market and make money on this, that's basically like printing money, right? And so if your personal success ceiling is capped, let's say, I genuinely believe that each individual has what's referred to as a unconscious performance limit that basically sits right up here. And it goes, okay, I can make $4,000 a month and that's all I can make. And that's all you'll ever experience is making $4,000 a month. But it's because there's a belief somewhere that you've gone into agreement with. There's probably a lot of other reasons too, but that you'll never be able to make more money than that. And if suddenly there's this thing that drops in your lap, oh my goodness, I can just keep making more money if it's like printing money by forecasting the market. What does that mean? You need an unconscious performance limit to be able to actually have that show up in your life. Well, you'd need probably a lot more than just only being able to making $4,000 a month. So what happens is there's conflict internally about inner beliefs, about what you allow in your life, about what you believe you're allowed to have in your life, where there's a conflict. And if you're using your intuition, you're using this part of your mind to access the information, and there's another belief in your mind that disagrees that you should have this, they're gonna collide with one another, and you're gonna get wrong answers. And your accuracy will be lower. It's almost a meme in different remote viewing circles in private forecasting groups where students who have practiced remote viewing are really, really good at hitting photographs in practice. And then the moment they start putting money on the line, their accuracy goes in the tank. It falls through the floor. And it's like, well, why is that? They're doing the exact same structure. They're doing the exact same remote viewing ability, but their accuracy is zero. It's like almost uncanny how bad their accuracy is. And what I've found in my own research, and I'll be talking more about this actually on Sunday in my presentation about what I've achieved in the financial markets working with private investors, what I found is that one of the biggest blocks is it exists internally. It exists in your own belief system about what you believe is possible for you. It's related to your relationship with money, with wealth, with abundance, with a lot of different things. And so what is the accuracy answering a binary question with ARV? There's so many variables on that to give like a single percentage would just, there's no way to really do that. It depends on the viewer. It depends on what the type of target is. It depends on whether or not, you're set up to potentially make a ton of money or not make a ton of money with it. But I mean, if there's not money on the line, I'd say it's probably a lot higher because then you're not dealing with all of those internal kind of conflicts that may arise, that you may have under the surface and not even be aware of as far as your relationship with money and wealth. So hopefully that answered your question. Just real briefly, kind of the other ones. Jeremy asks, your style is CRV. Did you learn from Ed Dames? Is ARV only done with CRV? I use a lot of different methods, Jeremy. I use CRV quite a bit. I did go through Ed Dames' course. I actually did a lot of high-level training with Dames. He's actually a fantastic one-on-one coach, believe it or not. I actually use CRV to tackle associative remote viewing projects. Typically when I'm doing much more larger scale projects like business intelligence, things like that, I don't use CRV. Typically I use technical remote viewing, which is from the Dames camp, just because that's what I learned on first before going out and learning other methods. And then I also use extended remote viewing, typically for when I'm interested in understanding a problem from a remote viewing perspective, as opposed to getting a binary yes or no answer about something. Extended remote viewing is not pen and paper. It's actually, if you're unfamiliar with it, you put your body asleep, go into an altered state of consciousness, and then you go from there. So Nat is asking, on Sunday, will you be talking about how to overcome internal limiting beliefs? I will be addressing that, yes. But as far as the specifics, we'll see. I still have a little bit to do on that presentation because I kind of shifted gears for today. But I definitely will be talking about what I did and kind of going over my journey. And so there'll definitely be some valuable information there for you if you are interested in doing similar things. And so, yeah, I will be definitely talking about that topic, Nat, on Sunday. Alan's asking, has your structure changed since the last online class from 2 years ago? Structure, I'm guessing you meaning, if you're meaning remote viewing method structure, not that is pretty much the same, but the way that I actually do ARV judging, the way I do set up photo pairs to actually run ARV, that has actually evolved quite a bit. And over the past 2 years, I've done a tremendous amount of experimentation with the different types of remote viewing to solve the question, how do we make money with this in the market? And some of this had to do with dowsing. Some of this had to do with really deep diving into extended remote viewing, which I had a tremendous amount of success with, such as getting exact dates, exact numbers, things like that. That was actually, I'll be talking about that on Sunday too, where there's this belief among a lot of people in the remote viewing community that numbers are not possible to acquire with RV. And that is 100% false. That is 100% false. Multiple times over the past 2 years, that has been possible, where exact numbers in the market, exact dates even on when there are big shifts in the market were obtainable and were obtained. So I'll be talking about that on Sunday. So again, here we are with beliefs, as I went into that thinking, it's not possible. Everyone says it's not possible. You can't do numbers in RV, so why try? And I was really confronted on that by one of the investors I worked with, and said, have you ever tried it? Have you ever spent time trying to solve it? And I'm like, no. He says, well, don't you think it'd be worthwhile? And I'm like, shoot, that's a good idea. So it's, I'll have a lot more to say about numbers on Sunday. How would you go about doing an ARV solo project? Is it better with a team or partner? Well, to be honest, Chris, that is actually one of the reasons that I'm kind of coming out of back into the public sphere for a little bit. It's because I've been doing this work in the private for the past 2 years or so. And even, it's funny because I actually remote viewed what's the optimum kind of next step for me to progress with this. And all the data I was getting in my session work was, you need more to be working with more people. So I'm like, shoot, that's a good idea. So I'm like, how do I do that? Well, starting a new community, starting live streams, getting more people interested that would be interested in tackling this type of thing alongside just what I've done. I think there's a lot of value in working with other people. Can it be done solo? It can. If you are interested in kind of doing something solo, and you're very much on the DIY, I like figuring things out for myself, running my own projects. I actually have a couple of people mentioned in the chat. I actually have an online course that's pretty affordable, video course that you can kind of go through that really dives into the details of how I set up an associative remote viewing project, queuing, photo pairs, things like that, running a session so that you can do it yourself. And that's just over on my website, technicalintuition.com. So if you want those types of details to be your own project manager, that's definitely a really good place to start. It is possible, though, to run ARV sessions by yourself. Let's see. Dwayne was asking about what is remote influencing, heard anything on it. I've never really explored remote influencing. I've never seen any evidence about it. I've heard a lot of stories. There's a lot of people with stories about it. And it's a really kind of, how would I describe it? It's enticing to a lot of people. Ooh, let's remote influence. And so maybe I wouldn't put it outside the possibility of, or I'm sorry, the realm of possibility, outside the realm of possibility, but it's not something that I'm really too interested in. But let's jump into an actual exercise here. And I'm going to show you, just going to spend a couple minutes here, and I'm going to show you a very, very, oh, that's the wrong one. A very, very simple technique on how to actually do remote viewing. This is your first time. My goal here and my promise to you is to make this beginner friendly. And so I'm going to show you how to do a very simple remote viewing session in just a few minutes. If you want to just get your feet wet. Obviously, there are much more complex methods out there on how to get more information, more data, higher level data, but this is a good starting place if you're just beginning. So there's 3 steps I want to show you here. The very first step is what I refer to as shaking hands with whatever it is you're remote viewing. And so it's like there's different name. There's a specific name for this, which is creating an ideogram, but it's shaking hands with the site. It's like you're greeting it. Hello, tell me about yourself, whatever you're greeting. And so the way you do that structurally in a written remote viewing session is you get a number, which I'm going to be giving you one, you write it out, and you let your arm create a spontaneous mark on the page. So here's what that looks like. Let's say the number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you create very quick, like half a second. This should be like a bolt of lightning coming down your arm onto the page to create what's referred to as an ideogram or a handshake, whatever you want to call it. The scientific term is ideogram, though, just so you know. But there are more methods in here on how to do this. There's a lot of discussion I could go into about what's referred to as decoding. I'm not going to do that. It's not necessary for a complete beginner session. This is all you need to do to shake hands with the site, is trust that this number is associated. I've had it set up for you in advance, and that this bolt of energy that you just want to very quickly create a spontaneous line mark on the page, that's that handshake. And then the rest will be directing your attention to spontaneous perceptions you get. So this is step 1, handshake. Step number 2. Step number 2 is you're going to shift your perception, usually internally, but you're shifting it to any spontaneous data that's coming into your awareness, and you're writing it down. And I like to do this you can do this kind of free form if you want. When you're just beginning, I prefer to do it a little bit more structured way, where you write down any color. So here's what you start with. You start with colors. And so you say, okay, I've shaken hands with whatever this is. What are the spontaneous colors that are coming into my mind now that I've done that? Maybe a spontaneous color here, just in my mind, I think of blue. And then I think red. And then another spontaneous one is patterned. So write that down. And then another one is, I actually didn't get a color. I actually got the next category. So these are colors. Next category is textures. You don't have to write these columns when you're doing the session. I'm just doing that for your convenience to follow along. And so the next piece of data that spontaneously just came to mind was fuzzy. Now, an interesting thing happened when I did this, when I wrote down the word fuzzy, and don't be surprised if this occurs when you try this yourself, but your imagination and your analytical mind, which is a master pattern matcher, when you do it all the time, you look out your window and you see cars and trees and roads and all these things, and they're immediately there. Snap your finger, you look, and you identify it. Your brain is in a master pattern matcher. But my pattern matcher gave me this idea of a bumblebee. Well, I'm not interested in nouns. I'm not interested in high-level ideas when I'm running a remote viewing session, especially not at this point. Maybe later on in more advanced techniques, but here I'm absolutely not. All you're interested in with this basic methodology is just writing down spontaneous, descriptive sensory data that comes into your awareness after you shake hand with the site. And so what do you do if you get something that's too high level? Well, you need to objectify it, look at it, and then come back to where you left off and let it go. And so the way I do that is just over and whatever does it. If you get like a clear mental image or you get an idea that's really high level, you just want to write it down, observe it, and then let it go and return to where you left off. So the way I would do that would write just AOL, that just stands for, it's just a syntax for an analytical overlay, just my imagination, a little dash that just stands for I'm breaking from the session, and then Bumblebee. Let's say that's what I had. I like to also even drop my pen just as like an extra symbolic gesture to my unconscious mind saying, hey, what I wrote down there, that's not data. That's just me, my own imagination helped me out. pick the pen up and go, okay, where was I? I was on textures. What spontaneous textures are coming into my mind? All I want to do is put my perception, my attention towards those and write down whatever I perceive. So maybe I get back and I get hard, soft. You're just writing them down. You're not trying to figure it out. You're just listening. Whoops, I just turned this off. That's funny. How'd that happen? There we go. It's back. And so you want to go through, here's the actual list. I'll just go to the next one. And I will, when we run this, the hands-on session, I'll be guiding you through these so you don't need to remember these. I'll be saying, okay, do colors, do textures next. Next after that, you would get smells. So maybe it's a fresh smell. After that, you want to do tastes. If there's a random spontaneous taste that comes in your mind, maybe it's bitter. I don't know, it's just what's coming in spontaneously right now. After that, it would be temperatures. Is it hot? Is it warm? Is it cool? Oh, maybe I had the idea of warm, had the idea of hot, had the idea of body, things like that. And then after temperatures, you go to sounds. So sounds could be, okay, well, you can use like descriptions of sounds like buzz, kind of a thing, buzz. If you get that though, that again immediately reminded me of my analytical overlay, which was the bumblebee again. Well, I absolutely want to write that down again. Bumblebee again. Drop my pen, pick it back up, keep going. Because you're just giving yourself time to objectify it, let it go, and then return to where you left off. It's very much a yield and return type of a process with AOL. Finally, the last thing you write, just for sensory descriptors, are dimensions. And a dimension can be anything from a density to a motion to a dimension itself. And so like, is it big? Yeah, I feel it's big. I feel it's wide. I feel it's wavy. I feel it's peaked or pointy. Pointy. I mean, these are just random words off the top of my head. See, it seems random because you're using the avenue for collecting data in a remote viewing session. It's not just random. I mean, it may seem random, but the idea and the way that this works is that by doing this handshake first, the avenue of spontaneity is where you get these descriptors coming through. So it's going to use what feels random, what is spontaneous to you, as an avenue to give you information about whatever it is that you're viewing. And so all you're doing, your job is just to record it. You're supposed to write it down. And if you have some thing kind of distracting you that's not just pure sensory data, like a car or a bumblebee or an airplane, you need to objectify that, let it go, and get back to just listening to spontaneous descriptive sensory data. And so then you finish up with the descriptors. The last thing you do is referred to as what's called an aesthetic impact. An aesthetic impact, really, it's just if you were there, wherever there is, whatever you're viewing, how would it make you feel? It's just a one-word reaction. It's called an aesthetic impact to if you were there at the site. So maybe it's just spontaneous. You don't know. I mean, you can't know consciously because you don't know what your target is. All you can know is what's in your awareness. And so in your awareness, you go, how would I feel? And immediately you may just get the idea of like, I'm dread. Dread's what came in free. I'm dreading it. I don't know, whatever it is. But it might be dread. It might be happiness. It might be observant. Could be anything. It's whatever it feels like. If you were there, if you're one word to describe it, this is the place to write it down. Final thing you would do in the session is now you would do the final step. Step number 3 is you can do a sketch. And be really quick with this. There's definitely a lot more advanced ways to do this, but just for a beginner's session on this, just be really quick, be really kind of gestalt almost like in your sketch here, where it's just what lines do you feel spontaneously belong on the page? And so maybe you're just getting this feeling because you were getting dimensions over here of something big, wide, wavy, peaked, things like that. You start sketching. Well, what does that feel like it would look like? Well, it's like, I got some wide here, got some things over here. Here's the wavy, whatever, be very, very loose with the sketch. And you can do a couple sketches. If you feel like there's like something here, maybe I have like some big thing here, and that's one thing. And then maybe I'll do another sketch down here because I'm also getting this idea of something that is like round. And then there's a lot of like things on it. I don't know. That's just like, it's completely random I'm doing right now. But I just want to give you an idea of keep your sketches really simple right now. You do not want to be doing, a Leonardo da Vinci sketch right now at this point. This is not where you do that. You keep it loose, you keep it diagrammatic, and you let whatever feels spontaneous of what you want to create on the page, because that's the avenue you're getting the data. Put that on the page, and when you're done, just go ahead and write end. And so that is a very basic way to do a very simple remote viewing method to get data about whatever this is, which I'll be giving you. So why don't we go ahead and jump into this? All right, so you'll need a piece of paper, maybe two, if you have some sketches to do and you want more room. If you already have a different method that you're going to use, obviously go for it. But I've already set up a task that's a market-related task. So here is going to be the number that you will use to start off your session. So I'll give you about a minute if it's your first time you're using the basic method. Make sure you're settled. In a minute, I'm going to start giving audio guidance on how to go through the session. If you already have your own method you want to use for this practice target, you can just go ahead and mute me and rejoin me when you're done. And just have if it is your first time doing a session, just really, the worst thing you can do is really be in your head about it. Just try and, let it be what it is. It's a fun little experiment, and just let whatever wants to come. If you have an attitude of really not being invested in the outcome, it's actually probably the best attitude you can have. So go ahead and you can begin now. Write out the number on the page, and immediately when you write that last number, create a spontaneous line form on the page, about half a second. Do that now. As soon as you finish, start with colors. Any spontaneous colors that arise in your mind, write them down. Shift over to textures. Textures are like if you were there and you could brush your hand or the palm of your hand across what's there, what would you sense? What spontaneously comes to mind? If you get any really clear pictures, you need to AOL that, write those down, objectify it, come back. Because you can't possibly know what it is. You're only interested in perceiving what spontaneously arises in your mind. Textures. What does it feel like? All right, move on to a taste. Maybe just one word. If you were there and you kind of put your tongue on one thing that was there, what would it taste like? Whatever comes to your mind spontaneously. Do smells as well. Try and get one smell. If you're standing there, what would you smell? All right, move on to temperatures now. If you were there, what would the temperature be? What would you be experiencing? Whatever comes into your mind spontaneously. Don't worry about what or where it is. Just put your perception on whatever feels spontaneous. All right, move to sounds. What would you hear if you were physically present? Maybe you hear nothing. Maybe you hear something. All right, shift to dimensions. What would you perceive dimensionally? Whatever comes into your mind. Is it big or is it small? Is it wide or is it narrow? Is it circular or is it square? Maybe it's both. Is it moving or is it still? Is it heavy or is it light? Whatever spontaneous dimensional data just arises in your mind, write this down. All right. Now I want you to write one single word that if you were physically wherever this is, how would it make you feel? One word. The first thing that comes to mind. And then write it down. All right. I'm going to give you a minute now to do a quick sketch. Let it be spontaneous. Let it be fluid. Do not get stuck in the details. Whatever line forms you feel belong on the page, just be spontaneous with the sketch. Don't try and figure it out. Just put those lines on the page. If you need to do a couple sketches, that's fine. I'll rejoin you in about 45 seconds. All right. Once you're done, you want to write end at the bottom of the page. You put the pen down. And congratulations, if this is your first time, that was your first remote viewing session. It's a very simple one, but that's what a structured written remote viewing session is. Just more complexity, more details are added to something like that. Okay, so we need to take a look at now the two photos that are associated with the target. And if you were accurately able to acquire what's referred to as the signal line for this session, your work should describe one or the other. So let's take a look at the very first photograph. Photo A. So the way you go about judging, there's obviously much more advanced way to do judging. We're going to use a very simple one here on this live stream. But what you want to do is take a look at your descriptive data. And you're looking for, in your colors, primarily, in your textures, in your dimensions, in your sounds. You can probably assume some of the sounds from just where this photo is taken, is that if any of the data matches what's in this photograph, write a little letter A next to that sensory descriptive data. And you can do the same thing for your sketches too. If one of your sketches, it's like, oh, I had a sketch that kind of looked like this, or this part of the sketch reminds me of this photo, you can put a little A next to that as well. And so go ahead and look for colors. So what colors are in this? Well, we certainly have the red of the bridge. There's certainly a lot of brown in this photograph from the landscape in the distance. There's certainly some like greenish turquoise hues from the water. And those are probably some white, I guess, from the haze. Those are probably the primary colors. It's the red, the brown, and then the turquoise and blue. White too. And look at your textures. What textures would you expect to get if this was the actual photo? Well, you have a bit of both. You have liquid, you have something that's wet, but you also have something that's rather hard, metallic, concrete. Even in the distance, you have dirt. And so it still would probably be pretty hard. Maybe granular, grainy. These are the type of texture words we'd expect if this was what you viewed. Smells, you're probably going to have a salty, fresh smell. Tastes, salty probably again, maybe metallic taste from the actual bridge. And then dimensions, what do we have here dimensions-wise? We have something that's vast. We have something that's long and wide. We have something that's arcing, or it's arced, not arcing, arced. We have wavy from the water. We have kind of peaked right here from the bridge. Up and down, undulating, all these kind of things. Those are the type of descriptive sensory data we'd expect if we were viewing this photograph. And so anything that matches A, go ahead and write A next to it. Photo B it's very different than this one. It's a little bunny rabbit. And also a girl holding a bunny rabbit. So very, very different. And so you need to do the exact same thing now that you did before. Go through your descriptive data and write a B next to all of the any sensory words that you had that match this photo. So starting with colors. What colors? Well, there's certainly a lot of white, tan, and green. Those are probably, there's also blonde, I suppose. But those are the primary, because white is the most significant color for sure. Textures, you have everything is soft, fuzzy, hairy. That's probably soft, fuzzy, hairy, mushy, maybe. Like everything is very soft in this photo. Smells, probably can't. I have no idea. Probably hard to tell. Tastes, probably the same. It tastes like grass. Tastes like hair, I guess. I mean, if you get that specific of it, but not a lot of tastes. And then do the same thing for temperatures. Can't really tell. I mean, the girl's in short sleeve and in shorts, so probably can't be too cold. And so finally, just check your dimensions. What kind of dimensions do you see here? Well, there's definitely spherical. There's definitely circular. Life forms often show up as circles. There's a lot of like the hairs coming out. So write B next to all of those. And so really the most simple, we're not going to go really deep right now in how to do analysis, how to use different mathematical formulas to get percentages. That's just way beyond this very beginner friendly live stream. But typically the way that whatever your data matches the best, whatever the more you have of one, that's going to be your result. So now you do is you look at both side by side. So we have photo A, we have a bridge. Photo B, we have this cute little rabbit with a girl holding her. Very, very different type of photos. One is soft, fuzzy, hairy. It's very close. The other one is very hard and wet and distant and vast. One is a life form. One is a structure and liquid. So very, very different. Pina says, please tell me it's photo B. Well, this is the interesting part, is that now that you can decide, you can make your decision, which one is it? Each one of these photos is assigned with an outcome. And so let's take a look at what those outcomes are. Well, I'm very interested in financial markets. So what I did is right before this live stream, took a look at the market on a particular instrument, financial instrument, and said, okay, if a certain thing happens, then photo A. If another thing happens, then photo B. And they're in a binary queuing setup. And so this is what it was associated with. Photo A is associated with the cryptocurrency, if you're familiar with cryptos. It's Ethereum. So this is a currency pair, Ethereum to US dollars, is that it will hit $490 before it hits $309. Photo B is the cryptocurrency Ethereum will hit $309 before it hits $409. And so what does that look like? I don't want to get too detailed because this requires kind of its own. Some people may not know how to read candle charts and things like this, but really, really simplistically, if we look at this right here, current price, when I set this up, the current price was at $390. Obviously, you can see it's been going up and down. That's what the green means going up, down, red means going down. Pretty simple. But what you viewed, if you ran this session, if you got A, what your forecast is, what your result is, if you described A, which is this photo over here of the bridge, your result is that it will hit this line up here first at 490 before it hits this line down here. Now, it may do a lot in between, but it's going to get here first. If you had B, you're basically forecasting that may go up and down a lot in here, but it's going to hit this line first before it breaks 490. And so we have a binary problem set. This is a type of queuing structure that I've used very, very successfully. And it's a way to it's a way to tackle ranges with associative remote viewing. And so what is the outcome? Well, I actually don't know, because right now we'll have to look, and you'll have to join me in another live stream and on the Facebook group, because we'll take a look at what those answers are. But before I kind of reopen the Q&A, I do want to promote kind of what I'm doing next, which is a brand new remote viewing financial markets Facebook group, which I'll be very, very active in. Anyone can join so long as you are interested in participating. I'm not really I'm really interested if you want to learn how to do more of this, if you want to be part of a community or a group that's going to tackle associative remote viewing, and not just associative remote viewing in markets, but using other remote viewing techniques, that's what this group is for. It's for using the tool in financial markets, exploring with experimental techniques, using a lot of them, and also being a part of live streams, because this is where I will be hosting my future live streams, is in this remote viewing group. So it is a private group. It's not just open to anyone, but obviously, say you're from the live stream, you'll get automatically approved. I'm really only interested in people joining this group that are interested in participating. And it's not just, a lot of lurkers and looky-loos. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in people that want to do this. And so if that's something that you would enjoy, that you would like, go ahead on over. It's just facebook.com groups, remote viewing FM. And that's where you'll be finding me in the future, and also the future live streams. So now that I plugged that, that's the end of this live stream. I'm going to hang around a bit to kind of talk with you guys, for those who want to hang around and take a look at a few of the sessions. But thank you for joining me, and hope you got some value out of this. Hope, got some insight into what is ARV versus regular remote viewing, just at a very basic level, a beginner-friendly level. And we'll be doing much more advanced things in the future on multiple levels. So I'm really excited to share not only kind of what I've been working on for the past 2 years, what the results were in the market, and a little sneak preview on that is, obviously I had private investors I was working with, but we generated over 6 figures in the market over the past year. So it's something that I know works. There's still a lot to learn that I know I'm very excited to experiment with and test, but even in my own remote viewing data, what is the next step for me to do this? It was saying, you need to start a community. And so I'm trusting my own remote viewing work, saying, okay, well, let's see how this goes. So I'm really thankful for you guys for showing up. Hope you guys got some enjoyment out of this at the very least. And if not, I'm sorry. But anyway, well, I'll hang around for a bit for those who want to hang out. So thanks for joining.